Good evening, y'all. Welcome to our Once Upon a Pastime series. I am Mac McGee, and we will be changing your view here in a second, as just double checking that we have the sound right and all that good stuff, and we do, and so we're ready to roll. Good to see James in the chat and John. So what we're going to do tonight, and that's why we're going to get into it, jump in and run, because I don't want to keep you long on these. I feel like on these, we're going to spend a lot of time together during the baseball season, so I don't want to monopolize your nights. I want to try to get these in and out and get them done. And I started putting this together. This is Game 4 of our World Series Once Upon a Pastime series. We've done 3 others. They were in different seasons. This will probably be the only one we do here for 2025-26 off season. But what this is going to be is us going into the teams that should have won a World Series, right? So that's why it's called Woulda, Coulda, Shoulda. These are the great teams of the past that came up short. You're going to see some teams that you remember. You're going to see some teams you probably don't even know anything about. But any way you look at it, we're going to dive into it, and we're going to do it chronologically. So we're going to start from the beginning and take you all the way to present day. And I think we'll have a lot of fun with this. So let me go ahead and change the view as we go ahead and start this. So there's your Once Upon a Pastime series logo there. And let me get the right view on this. I believe that's it. Yes, that's it. So you can still kind of see me, but what I'm going to be doing is when we talk about each team, we're going to put pictures up there so you can see who these teams were, who these guys were, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go ahead and get into it as we go into the Once Upon a Pastime series, the teams that never were, the woulda, coulda, shoulda. All right, number 1, this is the 1906 Chicago Cubs. And why are they famous? Why are they the team that we start off with? Why do people believe that this team probably should have won a championship? Probably at some point would have been looked upon as one of the great teams of the past and fell short. Well, the 1906 Chicago Cubs, they were a hell of a team. And this is right before the Cubs end up winning back-to-back World Series titles. So in theory, if this team kicks the door through, they would have won back-to-back-to-back. Right after that is when the famous curse began of the Chicago Cubs. Some people will point to the 1945 Billy Goat incident. I always point to the 1908. They call it Merkel's boner. And what that came down to is Fred Merkel, second baseman of the New York Giants, did not tag second base in an important game between the Giants and the Cubs. The Cubs called him on it. What they ended up doing was they ended up replaying the game. And that game ended up being important down the stretch. They played it towards the end of the season, and it ended up being the difference why the Giants did not go to the postseason and the Cubs did. The Cubs won the World Series, and people that were watching baseball, paying attention to baseball back then, declared even back then, you'll never win another World Series. And so 108 years later, the great Chicago Cubs of 2016 end up killing the curse, but 108 years pass. Well, this is the first team of this. This is the 1906 Chicago Cubs. And this Chicago Cubs team was a very good team. This team was playing their crosstown rivals, the Chicago White Sox. They were called the Hitless Wonders, and no one thought there was any way in the world that the Cubs would lose this. They won 116 games. That was the standard, and still realistically is to this day. It is the highest winning percentage in baseball history at .763, winning 116 games and losing only 36. 2 games were not played. So 116 and 36, the team's collective ERA was 1.76 ERA. They lost to the Hitless Wonders. They were a Chicago White Sox team that was an outstanding Chicago White Sox team. And that Chicago White Sox team was known for their pitching and their defense, but their offense was horrific, and everyone just thought the Hitless Wonders would just crumble. Well, what ended up happening was the Hitless Wonders got hot in a couple of games in that series, and they ended up winning the World Series in 6 games, and it's one of the biggest comeback. It's one of the biggest shocking outcomes in the history of all of sport. And in fact, in Game 6, Mordecai Brown, Three Fingers Brown, we've talked about him before on this series, he ended up pitching in Game 6 and got kind of clubbed around a little bit, and they lost that game. I believe it was 6-2 was the final, but the important thing to note on that one is that Mordecai Brown in Game 6 was pitching on 1 day of rest. He had pitched the previous game, Game 5. They had an off day, and the very next day after the off day, he pitched Game 6. And so, worn down. But back then, man up, let's go. The game on the line, we want Mordecai. I don't know what their game plan was. If he ends up getting the win, I don't know who the hell was supposed to pitch Game 7 because he was their ace. You think they would have held him out for a Game 7. But anyways, that's your 1906 Chicago Cubs. For those of y'all who may just be joining us, this is our Once Upon a Pastime series, and we're going over tonight the greatest teams to never win the World Series. So that we started off chronologically. We start off with the 1906 Chicago Cubs, and the next team on the docket that we have on here is the 1914 Philadelphia Athletics. Now, the Philadelphia Athletics, the reason why this team was so good, okay, first of all, you have to understand they won 99 games, which is a great feat in itself. But the other thing is the Philadelphia Athletics won the AL pennant by 9 games. They were a huge favorite to win the World Series in 1914, and that was because they had won the 1910 World Series against those Chicago Cubs I was just talking about, 4-1. They won the 1911 World Series against the New York Giants. That was one of the big teams of that time period. You're talking about Christy Mathewson and John McGraw's team of the day. They were one of the best teams in the first part of the 20th century. They beat the Giants in 1911 and in 1913. They did not win the pennant in 1912. That was one of the first Boston Red Sox teams. But this team had Chief Bender. We've talked about Chief Bender. That was one of the guys that kind of influenced the name the Cleveland Indians. They had Home Run Baker. They had Eddie Collins. We talked about Eddie Collins on the last show. And do apologize. I forgot to take that one down. But these are the 1914 Philadelphia Athletics on your screen. By the way, how cool are those damn jackets? That thing is pimping, man. Look at that thing. Dark white buttons and a white elephant. And remember, they took the moniker of the White Elephant on the Athletics because of the story we told last time. I won't go into that whole thing again. But White Elephant was looked upon as a bad thing, and instead Connie Mack embraced it, and that became their logo. So they had Stuffy McGinnis, and this team ends up playing the Miracle Braves, the 1914 Miracle Braves, the Boston Braves. This was a Boston Braves team that was in dead last in June and came roaring back, and really was the first feel-good story in the history of Major League Baseball to overcome such a deficit and go on to not just go ahead and beat everybody in the National League, beat them out and qualify for the World Series, but beat what was looked upon as the best team in all of baseball in the first part of the 1910s. And you're talking about a Braves team that ended up beating the Athletics 7-1 in Game 1 on October 9th in Shibe Park. The next day in Shibe Park, they win the game 1-0. Then they go to Fenway, and remember, Fenway was hosting the World Series because they just opened Fenway 2 years before, and there was such a huge fan interest in the Boston Braves because of the miracle run that they made that they ended up not playing the games in the Boston Braves home park at the time. They were in the middle of renovating, and they were going to open Braves Field in just a handful of months. But Fenway Park hosts Game 3 and Game 4. The Braves win Game 3 over the Athletics in extra innings, in 12 innings, and then they complete the sweep October 13th, Fenway Park. So after that World Series loss, for those of y'all who grew up in the 90s watching Major League Baseball, remember how the Miami Marlins were infamous for winning a championship and then tearing it down. This was the first time this happened in the history of baseball. Connie Mack, after that team collapsed, there was a lot of finger pointing, there was a lot of turmoil in the locker room, and he decided to tear down the entire team, wanting to rebuild quickly. Well, that's not what happened. From 1914 to 1928, or 1915 to 1928, after the 14th season, the Philadelphia Athletics are not in the postseason. They returned to the World Series in 1929 and would win back-to-back titles. But that was a serious collapse, and it really affected the Philadelphia Athletics franchise for a decade and a half. The 1914 Philadelphia Athletics, who lost to the Miracle Braves. All right, 1919, most of y'all are very familiar with this team. This is the scandal on the South Side, the Black Sox. They had a lot of monikers, right? And these are the Chicago White Sox of 1919. This was the best team in baseball at the time. In fact, they had Eddie Cicotti, who led the majors with 29 wins in 30 complete games. So he had 29 wins in 30 complete games for a 29-7 record. And he had an ERA of 1.82 that year. Now, you talk about minuscule. That was the right fielder, Joe Jackson, shoeless Joe Jackson. That was one of his better years. He finished with a .351 batting average, which was fourth in the American League. And he also finished third in the American League with 96 RBI. And he was only 10 hits short of being the hit leader in the American League behind the great Ty Cobb. And so that shoeless Joe Jackson led offense, led all of Major League Baseball with runs scored in that season. They had an elite pitching staff, and if they'd played that series in earnest, they probably beat the Reds in 5. Honest engine. They might have even swept them. But we all know the story. They threw the games. The rest is history, and the Reds are credited with that World Series win, though there'll always be an asterisk on it. In 1931, the Philadelphia A's returned to our list. You're like, my God, how could that happen? First of all, people don't realize this, and when they talk about the Athletics moving from Oakland and eventually they're going to be in Vegas in a couple of years, a lot of people just do not realize that is a team that, honestly, that franchise was an extremely accomplished and talented franchise for years and years before they ever headed to Oakland. Now, they've had their own mark in Oakland. I mean, the Oakland Athletics of the 1970s, and of course they continued their prowess in the late 80s and early 90s. But long before they were ever the Athletics of Oakland, they were the Athletics of Philadelphia. And when people talk about, I saw this trending recently where they were talking about that they need to give the A's moniker to Oakland because they really held the candle for it, and that the name's Athletics belongs to them. It really doesn't. If we want to split hairs, it belongs to the city of Philadelphia. You know, they started playing in the 1880s. They don't show up in Oakland until the 60s. So the Athletics in 1931, this is after back-to-back World Series championships. And one of those World Series championships, by the way, was against the great New York Yankees. That was just a couple of years removed from the 1927 Yankees. And the Philadelphia A's really outplayed the Yankees in this stretch. So they were stopping the Yankees from winning the World Series, right? And so with that being said, the 1931 Philadelphia Athletics will go down as a team that really, really should have been. They had 107 wins, by the way. 107 wins. This is a team that was led with Lefty Grove, one of the greatest pitchers of all time, Mickey Cochran, Jimmy Fox, Al Simmons. Those are all Hall of Famers. They don't win the World Series. They get beat by St. Louis Cardinals. This was the Gas House Gang before they were called the Gas House Gang. The St. Louis Cardinals got that moniker in 1934, the nickname of everyone calling them the Gas House Gang. But in 1931, they shocked the world and beat the two-time defending world champion Philadelphia A's. And I've never come across any kind of interview, but I would love to know in Connie Mack's mind which is a greater upset. I would say he would tell you that it was the Boston Braves of 1914, but that St. Louis Cardinal team was not a known team and very much could have easily replaced that. You could easily say that the 31 team should have won before the 1914 team did. All right, 1953. So we skip ahead 22 years. And look, there's a lot of teams I have to skip over because there's just not enough time in one show. But we wanted to give you an idea of what you have missed and then, of course, we're going to come through teams that you're going to remember. But this team here, we go to, let's see, I think I got that backwards. Here we go. 1953, the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Brooklyn Dodgers in 1953, the Dodgers repeated as the National League champions by posting 105 wins. Remember, this is in a time where the Dodgers are still looking for that first World Series title, and they're running into the Yankees every single time. Brooklyn failed to capture that World Series, losing in 6 games to the American League champion New York Yankees. And they lost it in 6 games. They had a winning percentage of .682. And in that time, in 1953, that was the best regular season in the history of the Dodgers. That stood, by the way, from 1953 all the way to 2022, right? So we're talking about almost 70 years. That team had Pee Wee Reese at shortstop, had Duke Snyder in center field, Jackie Robinson. He was actually a third baseman at the time, but he ends up transitioning back and forth between second and third, but he was listed as a third baseman primarily in 53. Roy Campanella was behind the plate. That was before his injury. And then, of course, the pitching was led by the great Preacher Rowe, and Johnny Podres was on this team as well. Of course, he would be the hero of the 1955 series. 1954. So we've got back-to-back because there's going to be one right after this. 1954. The Cleveland Indians. 242 run differential and 111 wins. Now, we always hear about the 48 team, right? Because that was the last Cleveland team to win it all. But this one, it gets overlooked because, well, let's face it, you don't talk about the team that doesn't win it. Only the diehard fans of the team will talk about the guy that didn't do it, right? But for more than 60 years, Cleveland had been the only team in Major League Baseball, that 1954 team, listen to this, they compiled 2 different 11-game winning streaks in the same season in 1954. That lasted until 2015 when the Toronto Blue Jays were able to accomplish the rare feat. That team had Bob Feller, Bob Lemon, Early Wynn. The Indians won 111 games. They make it to the World Series mainly because of their pitching staff, the guys I just mentioned. And the series is most known for, I don't think I still have that picture from earlier. No, I don't. I took it out. It's most known for, if you're a diehard baseball fan, you know what I'm talking about. The catch, the Willie Mays catch, the catch that he made into the back of the Polo Grounds, where he had his back completely to the playing field, and he makes that incredible catch that really galvanized the San Francisco Giants team and brought them a world championship. And the Cleveland Indians, who were looked upon. They weren't just looked upon as the best team in baseball in 1954. They were looked upon, and that year was one of the best teams that have ever done it because of that pitching staff. I mean, you're talking about a 242 run differential with an offense that really was not that outstanding, but it was that pitching staff that was just unbelievable. Bullet Bob Feller is one of the greatest of all time, and he was on there. He's on there with Early Wynn and, of course, the others. Now we go to 1955. And in 1955, we get the New York Yankees. And the New York Yankees, here we go. 1955, the New York Yankees. And they played the Brooklyn Dodgers, and that right there is a screenshot. It's the poster leading into Game 1 of the 1955 series. You can see there it was Don Newcomb versus Whitey Ford, much anticipated. We're talking about yet another rematch between the Dodgers and the Yankees, and this is the year that Dem Bums finally get the championship. But that 1955 New York Yankee team, and look, the New York Yankees won 6 titles in the 1950s. Well, it wasn't like that anybody's losing any sleep over the fact the Yankees didn't win another championship. But you put that aside, this was a really good team for the New York Yankees. Now, they would redeem themselves the following year, beating the Brooklyn Dodgers, and that was a hell of a series in itself. But in 55, the Dodgers prevailed, and you're talking about a team that had Whitey Ford, Don Larson, Johnny Sane of the famed Spawn and Sane and Pray for Rain. Well, he was a New York Yankee in 1955. Yogi Berra, Phil Rizzuto, Billy Martin, Hank Bauer, Mickey Mantle had already come onto the scene. And, of course, Elson Howard. And then you had Casey Stengel, the manager. So this was a phenomenal team, and they did not get it done. That leads us to the decade of the 1960s. In the 1960s, you will see one of the best to ever do it was those 1960s New York Yankees. And they lose to the Pittsburgh Pirates, and what they're most known for on that loss to the Pittsburgh Pirates is this. They end up losing to the Pirates on the walk-off by Mazeroski, right? And that's one of the most famous home runs in the history of Major League Baseball. But what a lot of people don't realize is that in the 3 Yankee victories, they blew them out of the water. They won the game 16-3, 10-0, and 12-0 for a combined score of 38-3 in their 3 victories. But the Pittsburgh Pirates found a way to win 4 games, and they would scrape by the skin of their teeth in every single one of those games. But if you did a combined score of the series, the Yankees win in a landslide. So it really is one of the true of all the sporting events that have happened in the 20th century. And we'll even go into the 21st century. It's one of the most incredible feats that's ever happened because, A, that Pittsburgh Pirates team was not looked upon as a juggernaut by any stretch of the imagination. B, they're running into this is the end of the New York Yankees era as far as being dominant. We're talking about from the 40s into the early 60s, right? And they find a way to scrape through 4 wins together in a 7-game series, but it was very evident to anybody that watched that series the Yankees were the much better team. But there were 4 games that the Pirates said, not so fast, my friend. 1969 hits, and we go to the Baltimore Orioles. They had a run differential of 262 runs. Huge margin, by the way. They win 109 games. They have 3 Hall of Famers on this team. Brooks Robinson, Frank Robinson. You see the 2 of them there. They had, on the pitching mound, they had Jim Palmer. And when the guy you see on the right, second from the right, that is Davey Johnson that ends up being a Brave and then a Met and ends up being the Mets manager. But that's Davey Johnson there on the right. But this is a team that was one of the better ones, and they were looked upon as a huge favorite to beat anybody in their path to win the World Series, and they run into the 1969 Miracle Mets, the Amazons, as they called them. And it was just one of those teams of destiny that ended up getting them in the end. All right, 1975. 1975, we go to the Boston Red Sox. And this was a team that ran into the Big Red Machine. And what you're seeing is a picture there is the celebration at home plate after the walk-off shot by Fisk in Game 6 that forced the Game 7. Game 7 was a hell of a game, too. We are going to do a Braves Country Theater in the very near future. And when we do that, we are doing this game number 6 of the World Series. I believe that's next Friday night. We have that to do, and we're also doing 1995 Game 6 of the World Series. And we'll be doing those on our YouTube channel if you're catching this elsewhere. Braves Country Radio. Okay. 1975, the Boston Red Sox, and this becomes a theme. In fact, I had actually kicked some Red Sox teams out of this because they had so much heartbreak over the years. 1975, the Boston Red Sox, after Fisk's 12th inning home run, beating Cincinnati 7-6. To this day, the 1975 World Series is considered one of, if not the best World Series of all time. All the games were nip and tuck. It featured not only just a bunch of dramatic moments, but then the guys that were in the World Series on those teams. I mean, they're all-timers. It really is unbelievable when you talk about the Yastrzemskis, you talk about the Fisks, you talk about on the red side, the Big Red Machine. Forget about it. That's one of the greatest of all time. You're talking about Joe Morgan and Johnny Bench and Pete Rose, the whole 9 yards. So it was star-studded. At the time, you had a group of players on both sides that really brought people. And remember, this was at the height of the television era for Major League Baseball, because this is before you had all your cable options, right? So this was the first World Series that they played that every game was at night. So they had huge ratings. And little did we know, within 10 to 15 years, they're going to bring in cable, and nowadays you're talking about all the different options where if there's a ball game on, a sporting event on, you don't necessarily have to watch it if you're not a big fan, because you've got things like Netflix and Hulu and all those other things that you can go and watch a movie or whatnot. But in 1975, this was the event. So the World Series, the Big Red Machine, the Reds knock them off, and it becomes a theme. I mean, we're not even going to go over it, but the 1978 Boston Red Sox, who led the New York Yankees by 14 games in the standings, they end up losing. They don't even make the playoffs or the postseason because back then you only had one representative. There was no wild card. Would have loved to have seen that breakdown, right? The Yankees run them down and then have to face them in the MLB postseason. But that was the famous Bucky Dent home run on the playoff between the Red Sox and the Yankees. So this has become a theme. And the Red Sox, we now jump ahead to 1986, and I think most people will always remember this season. Now, what you're seeing there is the Red Sox celebrating their American League championship right before the World Series. Okay. Why I brought this picture up, because we all remember the famous Mookie Wilson ball between Buckner's legs, right? And you're talking about a heartbreaking ending in Game 7, which, by the way, was rained out for 2 days. So we had to wait 2 days for that game to actually get played. And I remember distinctly it was taking place during a Monday Night Football game. I want to say it was Giants and Redskins. And the Red Sox got out to an early lead, and then they crumbled in the middle innings, and then the Mets just ran away with it. But you had that feeling when they lost Game 6 in 1986, that was it. That there was just no way for them to come back and win that series because they were just devastated. The hope was, for those of us pulling for Boston, was that those rainouts were going to give them a chance to kind of catch their breath, get their dauber out of the dirt, and go, all right, let's go ahead and let's fight to win this championship. But it took the absolute air out of the team. In 1986, everyone will always remember where they are. If you were a baseball fan in 86, you'll always remember where you were when the ball goes between Buckner's legs. And I can recite that Vin Scully play-by-play call that finished that game by heart, but I won't bore you with that tonight. But that leads us to, and you got to realize at this point, I'm becoming a baseball fan. I'm a very young kid at that time, but I'm becoming a baseball fan. So I grew up in the 80s baseball, born in the 70s, but grew up watching baseball in the 80s realistically. I kind of remember the 81 series. I vividly remember the 82 series. And by 83, I'm locked in. So one of the biggest remembers that comes to mind, I didn't even put it down, but in 85, you had the incredible St. Louis Cardinals, Kansas City Royals series that the Cardinals get hosed by Deckinger's terrible call at first base. Then 86, so I'm already locked into baseball, right? It's my sport. But 86, here come the Mets and Red Sox. I'm like, is every year going to be like heartbreaking? 87 ends up being the Twins versus the Cardinals. And I was an National League guy, so I was pulling for the Cardinals. You go to 1988. And the Oakland A's looked like not just the best team in Major League Baseball, but they looked like one of the best teams to ever be put together. They were stacked. I mean, they had the Bash brothers, McGuire and Canseco. This is a team that had Carney Langford, Don Baylor, Dave Parker, Dave Henderson, Dave Stewart. A lot of Daves on that team. And Dave Stewart was arguably the best starting pitcher in baseball in 1988. Dennis Eckersley was the closer. And he comes on in the 9th inning of Game 1, and a beat-up Kirk Gibson ends up hitting a home run, a 2-run home run. Well, I mean, we're talking about a guy who limped to the plate. Every swing that he took in that at bat, you could see him wincing. And there was a hanging backdoor slider that he's able to reach out there and lift over the right field seats. And once again, the guy on the call was Vin Scully, and a memorable call at that. The famous "She Is Gone." And that ends up propelling the Dodgers to a 4-1 series victory. But that A's team, by all rights, and we didn't even put this one in because I knew we were going to run out of time. But if you remember, 88 A's win it, or A's lose to the Dodgers. 89, they rebound and they smoked the Giants, and that was kind of a weird World Series because of the earthquake that took place. 1990, you're thinking the A's are going to go back-to-back, and all anyone could talk about was, man, if they just would have taken care of the Dodgers, we'd be looking at back-to-back-to-back. And most kids growing up in that time period, that was their favorite team. And then the Reds, out of nowhere, and this was far removed from the Big Red Machine, this was just a Reds team that had the Nasty Boys and Eric Davis and company, and they end up sweeping the Oakland A's. The Oakland A's, though they won their World Series in '89, in a vacuum, when it's all said and done, that was a very disappointing stretch for Oakland A's baseball. They should have won at least one more of those World Series. In 1993, you have this team, the Atlanta Braves. And they make our list a few times as we're starting to get into the modern era, right? They had a pitching staff they had the pitching staff of the 90s, right? They had Glavine, Smoltz, Maddox. And they played the Philadelphia Phillies in the NLCS, but if you remember, they had to chase down the Giants, the San Francisco Giants. The Atlanta Braves had not yet won a World Series. So they had not won a championship yet in the city of Atlanta. And the Atlanta Braves chased down the San Francisco Giants in the last great pennant race in the history of Major League Baseball, because right after that, you get the wild card. So that was it. You either won your division or you went home. And they chased down the Giants in 1993, and it just felt like they ran out of gas. They played the Phillies in the NLCS, and the Phillies were a huge underdog. The Braves had won 104 games. Remember, the Giants had won 103 and missed the playoffs. But they had some young kid that was starting to pitch for him by the name of Curt Schilling, and he was dominant. That was that Philadelphia Phillies team that ends up losing to the Toronto Blue Jays in a walk-off with Joe Carter. But before they did that, that was the first time that the Braves would learn to hate the Philadelphia Phillies, because they absolutely broke their heart. You go to the next year. I guess we don't have a picture for it. It didn't load. We go to the next year in the 1994 Montreal Expos, who probably should have been a World Series team in 94. The Braves were pretty far back in the standings. Braves probably end up with the first wild card, but I don't think they win the division. I believe there were 6 games back in the loss column when they shut it down in August 11th. And that Expos team, when that team crumbled because of the strike, the lockout, whatever the hell you want to call it at that time, that team that had Pedro Martinez, Larry Walker, the list goes on and on and on and on, they don't make the playoffs. And by the opening day of 1995, they are trading guys like it's hotcakes. In fact, Marquise Grissom ends up going to the 95 Atlanta Braves. 1995 hits. Speaking of 1995. And now we have the 1995 Cleveland Indians. And the 1995 Cleveland Indians, this team had one of the best offensive lineups in the history of baseball. You're talking about Kenny Lofton. I believe this is the entire... Let me see here. Kenny Lofton, Omar Vizquel, Carlos Baerga, Albert Bell, Eddie Murray, Jim Thome, Manny Ramirez, Paul Sorrento, who was still pretty good at that time too, and Sandy Alomar, who was batting ninth. And this team goes into the 95 series, and it's one of those showdowns that everybody wanted to see, because nobody thought that anyone was better than the Cleveland Indians in the American League in 95. And we all knew where the Braves had been in the last several years, right? The Braves in 1991, they'd lost the World Series. In 92, they lost the World Series. We just went over what happened in 93. And then in 94, you had the work stoppage. 95 comes in, and the Atlanta Braves end up knocking out the Cleveland Indians in 6 games, but it was a hell of a series. And it took a gem by Tom Glavine in that 95 Game 6 to be able to bring home the first championship to the city of Atlanta in any major sport. So you're feeling pretty good about yourself if you're a Braves fan. You got that win. Going, all right, man, that's what I'm talking about. Well, 96 shows up. 96, this to me is still the biggest crime against humanity when it comes to being a Braves fan. That 1996 team should have won the World Series. I know they wrote that goofy country song about 1998 Braves. It's the 96 Braves. I'm sorry. But whoever wrote that song must not have been around in 96 to watch them. That 96 team, they were coming off a World Series championship. They should have been back-to-backs. They were up 2-0 on the New York Yankees. This wasn't even going to be close. They jump out 2-0. The next 3 are in Atlanta. They lose game 3, but in game 4, they get out to a huge lead, a huge 6-0 lead, and then the wheels fall off. They can't get out anybody in the lineup. Girardi hits the big home run, and the rest is history. After that, it just felt like we were drowning in quicksand, and the Yankees bring home the championship. That is, of all the seasons, that's the most disappointing as an Atlanta Braves fan. That's it. It's 1996. They should have had that championship. And remember, that Yankee team did not have mystique at that time. They had not won a World Series in 15 years. Actually, longer than that. 96, that was, I guess that was closer to 18 years. I believe 78 would have been the last one. So this wasn't like you were going up against the juggernauts of the 40s and 50s of the Yankees, the 1920s Yankees. This was a brand new team. You weren't going up against the 1970s Yankees. This was an unknown team, but what cost them that championship is the same thing that cost them several shots at the championship. And I know everyone holds Sherholtz in high regard, but he never built a championship bullpen because he was very old school, and he just looked at it as you needed that starting staff, and you probably needed a closer, but the rest you'd figure out come October. And that's honestly what cost him, what cost the Braves a championship. Fast forward off of that one, it's the 2001 Seattle Mariners. They had a 300 run differential. They won 116 games. And they get smoked, swept out of the postseason, never even sniff the World Series. They do nothing. You talk about probably the most disappointing of all the teams on this list. It's probably the 2001 Seattle Mariner team. And that team was absolutely loaded. I mean, you're talking about a team, obviously you had the great Ichiro, but that team was absolutely loaded. And you look at how they were just a non-factor in the postseason. I mean, this team, even the guys that you wouldn't look upon it as the stalwarts, the Pat Borders, the David Bells, the Brett Boones, Carlos Guillen, John Olerud, those guys were solid in their own right. But remember, that team had Jay Buhner. That team had, we just talked about Ichiro, but that team also had McLemore. And that team had a pitching staff, and they had, speaking of the Nasty Boys, they had Norm Charlton. I think a lot of people forget Norm Charlton was on that team. Jamie Moyer was still in his prime. He wasn't just up there throwing up balloons. Arthur Rhodes in the bullpen. That was a hell of a team. Brett Tomko. I don't think a lot of people who aren't baseball lifers would remember Brett Tomko, but Brett Tomko is a pretty damn good pitcher. So now we go to the next team on the list. We only have a few more because I wanted to keep it rather short tonight. And we go back to the Boston Red Sox, and I just love this picture, and it's from that season. But how about the 2003 Boston Red Sox? And what these Red Sox fans went through with the roller coaster. And look, by no means have the Red Sox fans had it rough over the years, because they did always compete. When people talk to me about, well, man, it's rough being a Red Sox fan. No. It's not rough being a Red Sox fan. It's rough being a Chicago White Sox fan, right? They're usually in the cellar. It's rough being a fan of teams that never compete. If you're in there, at least you feel like you got a shot. But this Red Sox team was dominant. And it kind of reminded you of the 1978 team. They take it to Game 7 in the Bronx. Pedro Martinez on the mound. And he gives them 7 strong innings, and they continue to go to him. And they leave him in too long, and the Yankees come back. They tied the game. Aaron Bleeping Boone, as he's known now, hits a walk-off shot versus Tim Wakefield. And the rest is history. Now, the Yankees don't end up winning it. They end up getting knocked out by the Marlins, another one of those Marlins teams that got sold after a championship. But that Red Sox team honestly felt, and this is someone who doesn't have a dog in the hunt on either side, they felt like they were the better team. The Red Sox felt like they were the much better team in 2003. But they didn't get it done, and it just felt like this is never going to end. The curse of the Bambino will be forever. In 2003, you can imagine the offseason, they were absolutely distraught. Remember, they were in the sweepstakes in the offseason to possibly get A-Rod, and then he goes to the Yankees. So they think this is never going to end. And then we go to the 2004 St. Louis Cardinals. Now, this team might surprise you a little bit that they're on this, because everybody in the 2004, when you think of 2004, you think of the Boston Red Sox reversing the curse, down 3-0 to the Yankees, come all the way roaring back, win 4 games in a row. First team to ever do it in the history of baseball. Only team to ever do that. And they go head-to-head with the St. Louis Cardinals team that had 105 wins, almost a 200-run differential. And they used to call this team the famous, they were known as the MV3, because Albert Pujols, Jim Edmonds, and Scott Rowland all put up MVP caliber seasons that year. They got Larry Walker in a trade in August. And they were coming off an incredible 7-game series against the Astros. And so you're thinking at the time, all right, this is going to be a hell of a series. And it just never happened. They went into a buzzsaw into Fenway. And they lose the first 2 games there, and then they were swept out of the World Series. A lot of people won't talk about that 2004 team for St. Louis because you always refer to, well, man, that was just one of those things. But that was a damn good team. And they had the ability to be able to upset that apple cart. I mean, can you imagine if the Red Sox had won that if the Red Sox had beaten the Yankees and then gotten to the World Series in 2004 and didn't get it done? That was an incredibly talented team. Man, look at that old young Albert Pujols here in the midst of that. I think that picture is right after they won the NLCS. And now we come to our final one because I want to make sure we got this in under an hour. The 2023 Atlanta Braves. Gosh dog it. You talk about a team that absolutely, positively disappointed Braves fans. The 2023 team, that was an offensive juggernaut. And you talk about that team, you realize all the runs they put up, all the records they broke. They won the division in front of the Phillies by 14 freaking games. 104 wins, 58 losses. That is a team that should have won the World Series. They should have at least gotten out of the divisional round. They got the bye on the wild card. And then after that, then we started getting all the excuses of why they couldn't win. Because remember, that was the second year in a row. 2022 team ran down the New York Mets and then spit the bit against Philly in the playoffs. We go to the 2023 team, you're like, oh, this team's gonna do it. This team's gonna get it done. And that was the Ronald Acuna Jr. MVP year. That was a year where it felt like every player on the team hit 40 home runs. I mean, you had career years, not just by Acuna, but what about Ozuna? What about Matt Olson? Hell, even Orlando Arcia looked like an all-star that year. Sean Murphy. And it wasn't like they were all built on offense. They had Max Fried as their ace at the time. They had a hell of a bullpen. They had Iglesias. They had Jimenez. A.J. Minter. Charlie Morton was still there. They had a team. Heck, Kyle Wright. That was before Kyle Wright fell apart. They had a team in 2023. Even Bryce Elder was an all-star. They had a team in 2023 that, to me, outside of the 96 team, that is the most disappointing team in the history of the Atlanta Braves. Because of what they did, and then they just brought nothing to the party in the playoffs. And so that's the list. See if anybody's got any comments or questions or whatnot. I thought it'd be a little fun to go over these teams that, as we call them, the coulda, woulda, shoulda. These are teams that I think probably broke more hearts than even Elvis Presley, baby. I mean, these were teams, man. These were teams that I still believe that, in other words, if these teams played their season again 10 times, they probably win the World Series 7 of them, at least 8. 7 or 8 times. See if anybody's got any comments. If not, we're going to jam out of here. Uncle Charlie in the middle of a baseball show is talking about NASCAR. What? Let me see. I think that'll just about do it. We'll go ahead and wrap it up. If you missed it, go ahead and rewind. We'll also have the audio version out later tonight. Hope y'all have a good night, and we will see you on Saturday, 4:30. The Buffalo Bills and Denver Broncos. We're going to be doing the play-by-play, and then we're going to bring you the national title game on Braves Country Radio on Monday night. So those will both be on our YouTube channel. We try to share it to Facebook, but sometimes Facebook does funny things and they ended up marking it down. So sometimes we try to share it. Sometimes we just say to heck with it. So if you want to find the games, find the broadcast, please come over to our YouTube channel. It's a pretty good crowd, and we have a lot of fun. Braves should have at least 6 world championships. Well, the Braves have 16 world championships, but I know what you're talking about. 6 in Atlanta. They should have 6 in Atlanta. Yeah, that's actually not a bad statement, because they won it in 95 and 21. 22 or 23, they should have taken it home one of those years. I don't care which one. I picked 23 because they broke all the offensive records. 96, that gives us 4. 93, I think, is a strong argument. And if I was going to take one more, I guess we would go with 98, but I just don't think they didn't have the best team in baseball in 98 or 99. But I will say this, the 97 team that got screwed, they got hosed. It almost made our list, but we decided to go past it. The Eric Gregg game against the Marlins, winner take all. Where the Marlins won that game, they won that series, and they went on to beat Cleveland in the World Series. There's a very strong argument that 96, the Braves should have held that 2-0 lead and won the World Series. And in 97, if Eric Gregg wasn't so pathetic behind the plate, we would have won back to back to back. See y'all next time. I don't think 91 was a team for me, Charlie, because they were so new to it all. It was a feel-good, but they definitely had a better chance of winning it in 91. 92, that Toronto Blue Jay team was real. In 91, maybe if they're not playing games with the air conditioner, we end up getting that championship. So not a bad point. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye, sweetheart. Well, it's time to go. We're back tomorrow with another show. Well, unless we're fired, we'll talk to you then. Goodbye, sweetheart. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Guys and gals, it's time to go. We'll see you on the next show.
Same bat time, same bat channel.
It's closing time, y'all. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Have a great one. On your way out, please like and subscribe, and don't forget to tip your favorite bartender. We'll see you. I'm Mac McGee, signing off for Braves Country Radio.